I've just disembarked a European river cruise on an ultra luxurious cruise line, which is the most expensive trip I've ever booked. The average price of a cruise like this in the cheapest room is around £500 per person per night, which is 650 US dollars. I'm not sure what I was expecting from this cruise, but it certainly wasn't this. We had a very eventful trip and did things I will never forget. In the past, I've taken river cruises with budget cruise lines and I've always had a great time. I do like to travel as cheaply as possible, but when I saw a sale for a very specific itinerary in July, I thought this was my chance to get on board. The cruise would normally cost double what I paid, and I wanted to find out if it could be worth that price tag. The cruise I booked was a round trip from Venice, and it's safe to say I was more than a little nervous about travelling to this part of the world in the middle of summer. I was expecting it to be very hot and very busy without any air conditioning, but I hoped that we would be able to make the most out of the included excursions. I didn't know if I would fit in on a cruise like this. I wasn't sure what to wear or what to expect day to day, but I was excited to find out. Our cruise included flights from London and transfers to the cruise port. We were met in the airport by a Uniworld representative and taken to our ship, the SS La Venezia. I knew that this ship had had a little bit of a troubled past, so I was looking forward to seeing how she'd been refit. She was completely redesigned and had her name changed in 2020. It was on the transfer bus that I really noticed the first difference between this and the budget river cruise lines. There were only 6 of us on the entire bus, which was really nice. If this was a budget cruise line, every seat would have been filled. Even at 9 AM though, it was 30 degrees, which is 86 Fahrenheit. The bus did have amazing air conditioning, thankfully, and the journey didn't take very long. We had a very early flight, starting our day at around 4, but that did mean that we embarked the cruise at 10 AM, which is pretty unheard of. It's normal to embark at midday or the afternoon. The latest I've ever boarded a cruise was just after midnight, but this one at 10 AM has got to be the earliest. We walked right into this central atrium area, and for me this had such a wow factor. I'm not really sure if the word is eccentric or if it's bold, but whatever it is, I loved it. It did feel a bit weird being in here in my supposedly sweat-proof practical outfit, but I had packed dresses for me to change into later. Checking in was just like checking into a hotel. It could not have been faster or easier, helped I'm sure by the fact that there were only 6 of us checking in. They let us know that our cabins would be ready around 3 PM and that we were free to enjoy the rest of the ship until then. Like most river ships, the SS La Venezia is made up of 4 decks, a sun deck, a middle deck with a lounge and restaurant on it, and 2 lower decks which are mostly cabins. I'd booked the cheapest cabin on the ship, so I was down on deck 1. My cabin was actually mostly under the waterline, so I was looking forward to seeing that. Heading into the big lounge, I loved the decor and the seating. It felt bright and open, and I definitely think luxurious. The mirrors in the table were so incredibly clean that it tricked me every single time. Let me know if you see 4 books here, because there's definitely only 2 sitting on a mirror. I did read some of these books later and I loved looking at the artwork. This one here is one of my favourites and it just makes me laugh every time. Drinks are included on a Uniworld cruise, so we decided to start by ordering one. My dad had a beer even though it was only 10 AM, but in his defence, we had been awake since 4, plus we were on holiday and all the drinks are included, so what else are you meant to do? I'm always hesitant to say that all of the drinks are included because there's always the odd random extra cocktail or champagne or something that isn't included, but I never found anything I wanted that wasn't in the cruise fare. I wondered if things like the included drinks and the excursions would be the reason why this cruise cost 2 or 3 or 4 times that of a budget river cruise, but only time would tell. I did keep a tab of how much I would have spent on this cruise, and the outcome was actually quite surprising, but more about that later. At the end of the lounge was a smaller area that was closed off. They sometimes use this for private events, and I mostly just used it to get sweets from the sweet jars. Again, it was beautifully decorated and very, very comfortable. Your Britishism of the week is the word sweets, and sweets are what you in the US would probably call candy, any sort of small sugary confectionery. I love them all. I love all kinds of sweets. I decided to head to the toilet next, and that isn't something I would normally put in a video review, but I do think you can tell a lot about a ship from its public bathrooms, and these were amazing. I was a little bit confused about the placement of the mirror. It was really, really weird to be able to just look at yourself from above while you're on the loo, but if that is what luxury is, then I guess I'll go with it. On board the ship at this time was an interesting mix of people who were waiting to leave the last cruise and people who had boarded for the next cruise. The crew seemed to know everybody, and that's definitely a benefit of a smaller ship with a higher crew to passenger ratio. More and more guests were arriving throughout the morning, and at midday it was time for lunch. I was so excited at this point. I knew that it would be a buffet lunch, but I wasn't really sure how you could make a buffet particularly luxurious, but I did find out. We headed to the main dining room, and while we were walking along the corridor, I had a sneaky peek look into some of the cabins that were already cleaned and ready. I think it's human nature to want to look into open doors, just to make sure that there isn't a tiger or anything hiding in there that's going to pounce on you. I honestly was a bit lost for words when I saw these cabins. Uniworld described them as nostalgic and elegant, and I've certainly never seen patterns quite like it. The majority of cabins on board are what they would call balcony cabins, but they're more of a sliding door than an outside balcony. There were also a few suites in the middle, and the cheapest ocean view cabins down on the bottom level where I would be. I was so looking forward to seeing if my cabin looked like these. The buffet lunch was great, the bread was amazing, the fruit was fresh, and there was lots of choice considering there weren't really many of us there. I'd find out later that there were 96 passengers and 46 crew members. So me and my dad pretty much had our own designated crew member. Not literally, of course, you don't have one person who is cooking for you and then cleaning your cabin, but you get the idea. There is no fixed seating on Uniworld River Cruises, you just show up, you find a seat, and that worked really well, almost always. I say almost always because there was one lady on board who was cruising solo. She didn't want to sit with anybody else, but also didn't like the location of any of the tables for two, so she always wanted to sit on a table for four for herself, which of course they don't have the space to do that. The staff were absolutely fantastic and so accommodating, but you're always going to find the one person that makes it awkward. The crew were so patient. It was around now that I made the most amazing discovery. Down on deck 2 there was a place to get water, tea and coffee, and here I found 2 jars that were always filled with the most amazing cookies. They must have been made on board because they were always very fresh, and when we came back from excursions we would stop off here on our way to the cabin. We didn't have any official excursions on this first day because guests were boarding all the time, but when we went to our cabin we did find this schedule of all the excursions for the cruise. I find it so helpful to see everything written down like this, and I noticed that we had a lot of early morning starts and some excursions in the evenings. Given the intense heat, that did make a lot of sense, but I am not an early bird. I'm gonna have to bring you a full video about this cabin, so please check that you're subscribed. I don't want you to miss out on these padded walls. They are literally padded. We had a little bit of time before we had to go to the safety drill, so we decided to brave a walk around Venice. I knew that Uniworld actually do private access tours, so we would be visiting places before they opened and after they closed. Despite the heat, it was great to have a look around and it made me very excited for the week. Even though we were on a river cruise, we weren't really gonna be cruising very much. We only docked in 3 places the entire week and we never sailed overnight. On some river cruises, you can be sailing for full days, but most of the sailing on this itinerary was done a couple of hours at a time. It felt more like being on a floating all-inclusive hotel, and I was hoping not to spend anything extra actually on the ship. Heading back inside, we decided to spend some time on the top deck. It was here that we watched a gondola race that was just happening, and that was so much fun. There were always loads of boats sailing by here, and they all seemed to know what to do so that they didn't crash into each other. There didn't really seem to be any logic to it. Everyone was going everywhere, but it seemed to work. On the top decks were these sun loungers with this part to protect your face, which I think every sun lounger should have, and these really comfortable seats that were more like outdoor sofas. We also found a restaurant up here, which is a pizzeria, and I was hoping that we would get to try that during our cruise. Unfortunately, we didn't because they never opened it because it was too hot. I do find that a bit weird given that the ship is here year round and it has been for decades, so the hot Italian summer isn't exactly a surprise. They did bring some pizza down to the buffet a couple of days though, and I just hoped that we wouldn't miss out on more things. Towards the back was a seating area where the crew would often have their breaks. The crew on river ships work from the start of the season in spring all the way through till autumn. They live on board, they do get time off, but they're pretty much working all the time. The crew's cabins were down near my cabin, but they're much smaller, and looking at this plan, it looks like most people are sharing a cabin. I noticed that there wasn't a pool up here, and I really did think that was a shame. It's quite common for river cruise ships to have a small pool on the top or inside, but there wasn't one anywhere on this ship. Even a cheap paddling pool or a splash area would have been nice, just somewhere to cool off when it was hot, and it always was hot. At this point, I think I fell asleep on one of these sofas and it would not be the last time. They were very comfy. At the safety drill in the main lounge, they told us a little bit about the plan for the next day. There was an early morning excursion and another in the evening. Because of this, we would have our welcome on board chat and drink on what was effectively day 3. Knowing that I had a very early start the next morning and had been up since 4, I did not stay awake long after dinner. It was a shame that the beds don't split apart. You can't move them even 1 inch apart in the cabins, which was kind of annoying. I was cruising with my dad, so I just slept upside down, but apparently I did end up kicking him in the head. Sorry, Dad. Our excursion left the ship at 7:45 AM and we headed to the boat that would take us to the Doge's palace. We had a pre-opening tour, which meant that we got to have a look around without any crowds, and I'm so glad we did. It was very strange to be there while they were still cleaning, but we learned a lot about the history of Venice and the Doges. The Doges are basically the people who were in charge of Venice, and they used to run the city from this building. It has courts and even prison cells, and they were very hot at 8 AM. They certainly didn't have air conditioning way back in 1340, and to preserve the building, none has been added. I've got to be honest, I really struggled with this heat, and not just because I'm from the UK. There were people from California on this tour that said that the humidity made this unbearable. The walls were lined with dark tapestries, and it was just like being in a sauna. I'm honestly not sure that I would recommend visiting Venice in July to anybody that I know, but I hope that it wouldn't be like this all day, or I really wouldn't last very long. At one point, my phone said the humidity was 100, which is something I've never seen before. I didn't even know that was a thing. I'm so glad I brought my own bottle with me, because the Uniworld bottles that they gave out in the cabins were so tiny. They were around 400 millilitres, and that is not enough for a 3 or 4 hour excursion in this heat. I really think they missed a trick there by not selling a litre or 2-litre bottle, because we all would have bought it. Heading back to the ship and into the air conditioning of the cabin was incredible. I have never appreciated it more. I had a shower and would end up showering and changing multiple times every single day. If you'd like a representation of how hot it was, this is what happened to my chocolate bar that was in my bag. This is pretty much what I felt like inside. After another yummy buffet lunch, the ship set sail, but not for a new destination. We were doing what is called a scenic sail, where we sailed up and down the lagoon. I've never been on a cruise where we have sailed back to the start so soon, but it was lovely. I found a seat at the front of the ship where there was another seating area, and here we could watch the crew on the bridge and just the world go by. Tomorrow we would be sailing for a new destination, and we had to make decisions about our upcoming excursions. We went to a presentation in the main lounge and made our choices. My dad is a keen cyclist, and we've actually been on cycling cruises before, so he of course wanted to do the cycling tour, and I decided to do it too. I wasn't too sure how I would find cycling in this heat, given that I wasn't even very good at just standing up in the heat, but I hoped that it would be okay. I wasn't prepared for how it actually went, but the problem really wasn't the heat. The great thing about river cruises is that they can be very flexible with things. Because the evening excursion was heading off over dinner time, they decided to do a buffet dinner that would mean that everyone would finish earlier. They did the same thing when me and my dad decided to skip the midday excursion the next day. There were only 5 of us left on the ship, so of course they didn't want to put on a full buffet, and they instead offered us a 3-course meal. It was great, and the service couldn't have been better. There were only 5 passengers after all. Even though the excursions are included, that doesn't mean that they're mandatory. We did skip a few, and we would just wander off by ourselves in the port. We were each given a cruise card like this, and we could tap ourselves on or off the ship. This is how they know if anybody is left on land. I liked how it told us how many people were on land and how many still on the ship, and I wish it did that on all cruises just because I'm very nosy. The next place that we would visit on this cruise was an island called Burano. It is famous for its coloured streets, and I think you can see why. We took part in the included walking excursion and then came back the next morning before the shops opened. It seemed as though most people were there for the shops, because when we went in the morning, almost no one was there. During our included excursions, we used a little box called a Vox box. The guide has one of these that they speak into, and it comes out of your headphones. This is pretty standard on river cruises, and when I took a budget river cruise with the cruise line TUI, half of our tour group got stuck behind an automatic door that just wouldn't open for us. We could hear our guide in the headphones saying things like, "Where are they? I hope that they're going to catch up." But we were just there, we were just stuck. She did come back for us, thankfully. At this point, believe it or not, we'd actually not seen all of the ship. We set off on a mission to check out the gym, the laundry, and the spa. The gym had the most amazing views and it had a couple of machines. Considering that this is a small ship, I thought this was a pretty good size, and I did see people using this space fairly often. The spa was really just a room for massages, and someone was in there when I went by, so you'll have to use your imagination. I'm pretty sure that you can imagine a room with a bed in it, but if you can't, here is an artist's rendition. The laundry was located down by my cabin and is completely free to use, which was great. Towards the end of the cruise, I did notice more and more people using this, and given how hot it was and how often we had to change our clothes, I bet these machines are working all the time. On the level above the laundry, there was a specialty restaurant. I never saw anybody in there, I never heard it mentioned, it wasn't really a space that was used. Looking into the history of the ship, I found out that this area used to just be a seating area, and I honestly would have preferred that. I like the changes that they made to the main dining room and to the lounge, but when it comes to this bit, and to be honest, the cabins, I think I prefer the original design. The design of the cabin isn't one I'll ever forget, but it did clash a little bit with my 70s night outfit. I don't normally take part in theme nights, but Uniworld were fantastic because they emailed us weeks before the cruise to tell us what the theme was gonna be. I've been on so many cruises where I had no idea that it would be a certain night, and then I'm there on white night and I only have a red dress. Me and my dad decided to wear matching outfits, and there always is a fear at things like this that you're going to be the only people dressed up, but we were absolutely not. We were the first people to go into the lounge dressed up, so that was a little bit nerve-wracking for a few seconds, but there were so many people wearing the most amazing outfits. Nobody needed encouragement to get onto the dance floor, everyone just took up their spaces and danced the night away. At no point did anybody ever try to get me up or try to get me to dance or force me to do anything, and it was perfect. Can't get better than that. It was so fun just to watch everybody else having fun. This was the main theme night of the cruise, and aside from that, we also had a singer one night and opera another night. Cruises like this aren't really about the onboard entertainment though, because you are literally in Venice, and given the heat, the evenings are the perfect time to go out and explore. I did enjoy watching the lounge camera from my cabin. I have no idea why this is even a thing, but I would use it to check if anyone was in the lounge yet or not, had I forgotten anything. Every day before dinner we did have a little presentation, which was very useful. They would tell us about the next day's schedule and all the excursions. River cruises are a bit more regimented than ocean cruises, but I found myself settling very well into that routine. They'd also give us little snacks at the pre-dinner talk, so that probably helped too. Dinner was also at 7 p.m, which is a little bit late for me. My ideal dinner time is always 5 o'clock. So by the time dinner was over, I didn't really need a lot of entertaining, a quick drink, another shower, and then I would go to bed. Sitting on the top deck as we sailed away from Burano was the best. For me, this is what river cruising is all about. It was so silent, it was so calm. We actually did feel movement on this ship more than I have on any other river ship, but that was just because of all the traffic that there was in Venice. Every time a big ship went by us, it would make us rock, but there's not really much that they can do about that. It wasn't a problem, it never made me feel unwell, it just reminded me that I was on a boat. The waiters would usually hand out a cocktail on the top deck, a kind of sail away special, and I always tried them when they were offered. Apart from that, I mostly drank Coke Zero, and by the end of the cruise, I did not even have to ask anymore. They would just bring me my drink and it would just be magic. How the waiters remember everybody's drinks, I have no idea. I guess mine is a bit more straightforward, but I did hear people with much more complicated orders, and it never seemed like a problem. I'm pretty sure even if I said my favourite drink was a drink that does not exist, they would try their best to make it. We headed to dinner in the main dining room and we chose from a menu of starters, soups, mains and desserts. Vegetarian dishes were clearly marked, and I heard a number of people talking to the staff about allergies and intolerances. The great thing about river cruising is that the chefs can really get to know you, and they can be a lot more flexible than on the big ships. The food was always good and the bread was amazing. It might seem like a small thing, but honestly, this bread was fantastic. For the price of the cruise, I would expect it to be, but I never ever take good bread for granted. It's always worth mentioning. While I was distracted by the bread, we docked in our next port of Chioggia. This is where I had booked the cycling tour for, so I was a little bit nervous about that. We headed up to the top deck and we were amazed to see what looked like a massive cruise ship docked next to us, the Azamara Pursuits. By cruise ship standards, the Azamara cruise ships are actually pretty small, but from the top deck of our ship, which is deck 4, she seemed massive. The ship was docked there overnight and we watched her sail away the next day. When she sailed away, I got to take part in one of my favourite cruise ship things, which is waving. I know it might sound silly, but I just love how people who are on cruises wave at each other. I love finding somebody and waving at them and doing everything I can to get that specific person to wave back at me. Something about it is just so fun to me. I knew somebody who was on board that ship, so that made it even better, and when they left, we were left alone in Chioggia. We headed off on our included excursion, which was the boat tour, and this was the most relaxing excursion we had. I love this one. Because we were so far away from the concrete and the buildings, it did not feel too hot at all. Even the toilet on this boat had a fantastic view. The boat tour was very much what I expected, but the cycling excursion wasn't. When we originally signed up for it, it said a maximum group size of 20, but we had almost double that number. I'm glad they let everybody who wanted to cycle, but the size definitely did cause us some problems. I was expecting us to be cycling along the river to the beach, but the majority of the cycling was across town on roads and roundabouts. I had no idea the rules of how to cycle on Italian roads, and I did feel very much as if we were taking our lives in our hands. Even if I did know Italian road rules, I don't feel like anyone was following them. I do consider myself a fairly confident cyclist. I've taken cruises where you cycle every single day, but none have felt quite like this one. We were all okay. Mostly. I did meet one lovely lady in our group who was knocked off her bike, which was not good, but also not that surprising to me. I'm glad we did it and I did enjoy it, but I just didn't feel as though the description really matched the tour. The crew on board were always very happy to hear feedback about things like this, and I'm sure they'll change this going forward. It was also peak of summer when I did this, so the roads were probably much busier than normal. We would often spend our evenings on the top deck. We'd pick up a cup of tea from the machines, and the heat late in the evening was pretty much the same as England in the middle of the most amazing summer's day. Everyone on the cruise was very friendly and very interesting. By the end of the week, I felt as though I knew at least half of the guests fairly well. There was a great mix of people from the US, Canada, New Zealand, UK, Brazil, you name it, I could keep going. One night they did play a film up here too, Casablanca. Not my kind of film, I personally would have preferred it if they played something like Ratatouille, but maybe they do play Ratatouille on the river cruises in Paris, that would make sense. Casablanca did make sense for Venice. I thought the setup was really nice, the screen was impressive, and everyone could hear everything. Having any excursions included in a cruise is quite a luxury for me. I usually don't take cruise line organised excursions when I have to pay for them, and I just do my own thing in the ports. On some cruise lines, the cost of excursions can really add up, and that got me thinking, did I get my money's worth out of this cruise? I paid £2,000 for my cruise for 7 nights, including flights and transfers, sharing the cheapest cabin category with my dad. We didn't spend anything extra on board at all, and I actually went to the reception desk to check, do I have to sort of close my account when it's zero? And the answer was no. I found this cruise in a sale just before Christmas, and the regular price of this cabin was much closer to £4,000 per person, which is around $5,200 per person for a 7-night cruise. The excursions that we went on were fantastic, and not having to think about things like buying drinks was really relaxing. If you are someone who would buy excursions and you would pay for drinks, it's sometimes actually cheaper just to pay up front and to have those included. For me, I don't drink enough and I don't care about excursions enough to really make the price increase worth it, but I loved it so much and I very much felt like an undercover budget cruiser. There are of course other benefits to luxury cruises, like the fact you have more space per person and the food and the service is really good, but it's hard to kind of quantify that in terms of money. That said, I have never ever taken a cruise that I've not enjoyed. If I've paid less, I just expect less. As long as I'm safe and clean and not hungry, then I'm pretty happy. To check out a more budget-friendly river cruise, watch this video next. It's hard to know if luxury is worth it for you if you haven't seen the alternative, so I'll see you there in a couple of seconds.